Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth, not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast, hosted by Seth Andrews.
Jasmin Faulk is a human rights activist. I'm not trying to oversell it, but you're a human rights activist, focusing mostly on what?
Women's rights primarily, and specifically women's rights in the Middle East.
Because you were
a product of the Middle Eastern upbringing under Islamic rule in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s as a woman growing up in Saudi Arabia under the most fundamentalist and extremist form of Islam.
So are you multilingual then?
I am. I'm trilingual, to be precise.
Well, excuse me, Jasmin.
I'd like to say multilingual because I do speak 3 languages fluently. Italian, which is my mother's native tongue, Arabic, my father's, English, obviously, as you can hear me right now, and I'd like to say I can manage in Spanish, but my Spanish always turns into Italian.
But you spent 25 years in Saudi Arabia?
I did.
So what's that look like? You in the veil?
Pretty much, yeah. You can imagine from the age of 10, 11, 12, I'd say between 10 and 11 was when I was officially veiled because that's when I hit puberty.
Become a woman thing?
Became a woman officially, correct. And so at that point, you cover up, you're out in society and you are treated like an adult woman. Not that adult women are treated well under those circumstances, but essentially even as a child, you are expected to uphold the same exact expectations and rules and regulations and behaviors and conduct that an adult woman would, which is essentially covering from head to toe. And this was during the time when women were literally covered, like face cover, the abaya or the black cape on the shoulders or the head, covering any sign of your physical body, your shape, sometimes even your skin. Some women even wore gloves where you couldn't even see the complexion. And then when you're out in public, you're silenced. Your voice needs to be hush-hush.
So the hijab is covering the hair. And is it the niqab that covers the face? Which one makes you look like a beekeeper?
Good question.
Okay,
all right. Thank you. I love talking about this. So the hijab is essentially what a woman wears around her hair, so you can only see her face. That's a hijab. And the hijab is essentially a devotional Islamic garb. So a woman that wears a hijab, she has devoted herself to the religion and to the faith, and she will always wear the hijab, whether in public, in private, if it's just her male guardians, like her husband, sons, brothers, or father, she doesn't need to wear it. But around any other man, cousins, friends, relatives, whatever, she wears the hijab. And around non-Muslim women. So that's a choice. It's almost like a nun. That's her garb. With the niqab and the burqa, you probably hear the burqa as well, which is the burqa. Okay, so the burqa is essentially the Bedouin kind of traditional clothing. It's the face cover, but leaves the eyes open, but it leaves the eyes open fairly wide, and there's a line also almost like a thread that comes down on the nose, on the bridge of the nose between the eyes, and sometimes there's embroidery or beads, so it's a traditional face cover, and that's the burqa. That's a Bedouin traditional face cover. The niqab, which we also hear about, is not what you see Afghani women wearing. I don't know why that's been called niqab, but the niqab traditionally in the Middle East, where it was born, because it's an Arabic word, is more not the beekeeper. That's what they call niqab. That is a very Afghani thing. Arab women don't wear that. So that is an Afghani thing. That is a totally different thing, different language, different peoples, everything. But the niqab officially, where I was growing up and where it was very much in use, and I've also had to wear it, is essentially, it's a very, very thin slit in front of the eyes, and it's just like this tiny little opening in front of the eyes, and the rest is all covered. So it's similar to the original Bedouin burqa, but it's thinner. The opening is much tighter, and you can barely see through.
What I was interested in when I spoke to another ex-Muslim female, she was like, it actually has the opposite effect. So what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to desexualize you, right? It dehumanizes, really. But she's like, it actually produced the opposite, sort of a forbidden fruit effect, right?
Yeah.
Because the more you were covered, the more you were actually sexualized,
Of
right?
course. And especially if your eyes only were visually available,
Yeah.
it could do a lot of things with the eyes.
I saw some of those slits in the head covering where they were wearing eye makeup.
Oh,
Is
yeah.
that a thing?
Technically, they're not supposed to. So if a member of the religious police see that, they will completely harass you and they'll tell you to cover completely, like just throw the whole veil on your face, which has happened many times. I've experienced that. But usually when girls are doing that, one of two things are happening. Either it's because they just happen to be made up underneath and they're, that's just, maybe they're not that concerned about having their eyes made up, or they're intentionally doing that because they want some sense of femininity and maybe attract
Power,
attention in
maybe.
some way.
Yeah.
Power, but also just a little bit of attention, because that was a code between young girls and young boys. It's just kind of, this is what I have to offer you, and it was an interesting exchange.
I think it was true in Iran. Tell me if this was the case in Saudi Arabia, that in a court of law, you had to have 2 females witnesses for every 1 male. Is that close?
Thank you for asking that question, because I tend to bring up the conversation around the fact that in the Islamic law, the woman is half the value of the man. And anytime Muslims hear me say this, they get very offended and they say, I did not understand the interpretation of the Quran or of the scripture. Fair enough, perhaps I didn't. I will tell you what that law means, and then you tell me if you think that that is translated into the woman is half the value of a man. So in an inheritance, the woman gets half of what her male relatives get. So if a father dies, the sisters get half of what the brothers get. The mother gets half of what her son gets. So that is one way. The other way is if there is a crime that is committed, you do need, as you mentioned, 2 female witnesses to 1. If you have 1 female witness, it's not enough. If you have a male witness, that's enough.
In public, did you always have to have a male escort?
Ideally, yes. So if the religious police was around you, they would definitely give you a hard time about the fact that you are in public without a male guardian, and that is a problem. The government at the time did not necessarily enforce it through kind of a generic rule, because they expected women would have to go shopping sometimes alone. The man is not always available to the women. And so there were times but it depended on why the women were out in public. If you were shopping, if you were doing something reasonable, well, sure, of course, we'll justify it. But to just be out to have fun, of course not.
I have to come back to this term I've heard you use at least twice, religious police.
Yes.
What's that even look like?
So the religious police were a very prominent, visually visible entity in Saudi Arabia in the primarily 80s and 90s. They're known as the Mutawa. If anybody's hearing this and they've spent any time in Saudi Arabia, including foreigners, everybody knows who the Mutawa were. At the moment, from what I hear, based on the changes that are happening in Saudi Arabia and the kind of the progressive movement that's happened since 2018, supposedly they are no longer in power. I think the establishment still exists, but they don't hold power anymore because the current de facto king and the crown prince has taken that power away from them. But at the time, basically, they were law enforcement. So you would visually see police officers on the sides of a potentially 1 or 2 men in the middle who are dressed in traditional clothes. If anyone remembers what Osama bin Laden looked like, that's what they look like. The long beard, the headdress, the thobe, which is the long male dress, usually short at the ankle because that's a symbol of devout religious humility, and then the big cape. And they would walk around with a cane, and if they saw women who were not behaving according to their standard, they could beat the woman. They could grab the women, throw them in a suburban GMC truck, and take them to prison.
I love these stories out of Iran with the Iran Revolution, these extremely brave women who are like, they're ripping the head coverings off of the clerics and running down the street, and they are burning their own coverings, and they're standing in the street saying, we are people, and many of those folks are paying with their very lives. Anything like that going on in Saudi Arabia?
Well, at the moment, there's no need for that because a lot of changes have happened. I have not been back to Saudi Arabia since 1999, but I hear, obviously, through the grapevine and obviously everything we see here in social media and the news. And so at the moment, I don't think those are practices that are necessarily needing to take place. But when I was growing up, certainly women have tried that and gotten in a lot of trouble.
So right now, it seems like Saudi Arabia is kind of running for office. I mean, how do I say this? I feel like there's a massive PR campaign to westernize it, to make our doors open, and we're like, wow, they become much more progressive. Look, now women can drive. As if, we're supposed to say, welcome to, welcome to this century.
Right. It's like when they say, look at that dad, he's so good, he's babysitting his kids. So you don't babysit your kids, they're your kids. That's your job. You should have done that all along. You're doing good things for women, great. Do we need to just applaud it as all of a sudden it's the greatest thing? Sure, we can celebrate it. My concern is we can celebrate it, but we can't forget and deny what has happened in the past. So we don't just gloss over, the 3, 4, 5 decades of oppression that women experienced and not address it, because perpetually this will repeat itself if we don't address it and recognize that it was a problem or a concern.
We're in bed with Saudi Arabia, they're in bed with us. What the hell's that about? Is it just money?
Sure. It started in the 1950s when oil was discovered. A great convenience relationship, which, I try not to be a political analyst in the sense that I want to necessarily analyze, because every government on this planet is, or at some point has been, corrupt. So I can appreciate that has become the global style of communication. That's all fine. What I find a problem with is when we allow our interests to completely bypass human rights. And this is what's happening between the West and countries like Saudi Arabia.
We just look the other way.
Totally.
You're going to execute journalists. You're going to behead people in the streets without due process, as if I was a proponent of beheading anyway.
Right.
The documentary Dissident just put a chill through my spine at the power. Obviously, they're extremely well funded. Their influence is major, and now they're like high-fiving all of these Western powers. It's terrifying.
It is, and what terrifies. So I expect that from governments for the most part to behave that way. What concerns me more is the people, is the lack of understanding and information that people within their societies have. For example, in the United States, we hear a lot of call to action and activism for what's happening in Palestine right now. Fantastic, that's great. What I have concerns with is that the call to action is completely out of place. So yes, they're calling for the horrors that are happening to the children and the people who are being murdered, killed, and starved, and genocided, and all of that. But at the same time, there's this equation of queer rights to the Palestinian rights. I do not see the correlation. Not only is it completely counter to what that culture believes, which is a very homophobic and transphobic and LGBT phobic and all of that. So it already has a stabilized approach anti these, ideologies. And at the same time, I've never heard anyone say, hang on a minute, what about the women that are there that for centuries have been living under oppression? They have forgotten what the purpose is. And so they walk around wearing the male Arab garb in protest or in solidarity.
Who walks around wearing the garb?
Westerners, Americans.
Okay, so people who are here and perhaps for the noblest of reasons are making a blanket pro-Palestine demonstration.
Yes.
They're dressing in a covering, which is a male covering?
Correct. The kafia, what they wear, which in Palestine it's called a kafia. Where I come from, it's a shamar or a ghutra. It has other names based on the color and the material. But what they're wearing is the Palestinian one. And it is a symbol of, yes, I understand it's a symbol of Palestine. And by the way, I want everyone to be pro-Palestine and calling out what's happening there. It's the lack of awareness of how much they've bypassed, and they've gotten just to the cherry on top, which is what's happening right now. They have bypassed all the years and decades of oppression and suffering that has happened in the region, not only in Palestine at the hands of the Jewish government, but in the Middle East as a whole under the fundamentalism of Islam. And so at no point do I see that solidarity actually calling for or questioning or opposing or boycotting these relationships between the governments because of human rights or because of women's rights.
So much left to talk about, including the mess overseas with Israel, Palestine, Netanyahu, Zionism, Hamas, and the protest. Many student-led protests, pro-Palestine protests that are happening in the West, for better and for worse. Wait a minute, some of the protests are actually not helping? We're going to talk to Jasmin Faulk and get her perspective next. Thank you so much for listening. An engaging conversation continues with Jasmin Faulk, ex-Muslim and author of the book, The Last Sandstorm. So you opened a can of worms with Israel-Palestine, so let's open it further.
Sure.
So we look at a lot of religious people, and this was my background. Like my mother and father had a pro-Israel bumper sticker. Like they believe that Israel is Zion. This is the end times. The Israeli state must be protected at all costs. It's part of, it's part of God's master plan before he returns, and all of that stuff happens, heaven, etc. And so what happened was they shut down any criticisms of what Israel might have done culturally, politically, etc., because Israel must be supported, period. It just became a single sentence. It was a bumper sticker. Today we'd call it a meme. And I think what a lot of people, even on the left that I have seen, are missing is that Netanyahu may be guilty of genocide, but a ton of Israelis can't stand and disagree with Netanyahu.
Absolutely. That is another example where we are not differentiating between the people and the government. So you can criticize the Israeli government all day long. I'm thrilled to hear that. And Netanyahu and the people. But there are so many Jewish people who don't deserve what's happening to them. And there are so many Jewish people who are speaking up against their own government on behalf of the Palestinians. Now, where I get frustrated with the left and the Western approach and all of that is that not only are they standing pro-Palestine, they are definitely becoming so anti-Jewish that they are forgetting to differentiate between the people and the government, all while they are defending Hamas. That is a very horrifically, fundamentally terrorist organization that perpetuates fundamentalist extremist Islam on the women of the region. So there's nothing redeeming about Hamas. They are terrorists and they are fundamentalist extremists, and I do not understand how the correlation of standing by Palestine equates also defending radicals and then perpetuating that hate against the innocent Jews.
All right, Jasmin, help me understand this. Aren't the Palestinian people under the boot of Hamas? They're oppressed by Hamas. I mean, the idea is by many that, well, hey, they could have revolted against Hamas. They must want, an Islamic state. They must want to overtake. They must hate Israelis, all of them, right? We're speaking in binaries again.
Of course.
So, I mean, from your perspective, how do you deal with the mess that is Gaza, Palestine, etc.?
So let's just disclose right away that not all Palestinians are Muslim, and we tend to forget that. There are many Palestinians who are Christian, some also Jewish. So Hamas is an Islamic organization. It's a political Islamic radical terrorist organization. And yes, they do have a chokehold on the Palestinians. But the Palestinians don't necessarily all subscribe to that ideology. If there are some who support Hamas, it's probably because they are the underdog and they have hope that someone will come and rescue them, i.e. Hamas could take over.
Survival.
Absolutely.
Okay.
But it's really hard to hold a very oppressed, essentially tortured people accountable for what they have nothing of, and that is control.
So if someone said, hell, they could have overthrown this, they may want Islamic rule or Islamic extremism, you would be much more charitable and say these are people who may not have many choices.
Absolutely. They have no choices, in fact. And not only that, I can even appreciate that argument if those same people, who, by the way, are usually also if they are supporting Palestine, they're also supporting Hamas because they don't differentiate between the two. So essentially, if we're looking at the people themselves, they are, the greatest victims in this argument. The same argument then could be said to the Jews of the Holocaust. They could have done something about it. You never look at a victim and say, well, they could have revolted. They could have said no. They could have, overpowered all those Nazi soldiers and taken over the concentration camps and broken free.
There's an odd perspective I've got because I'm an atheist and I'm not a Zionist, obviously. But I think Israel has a right to exist and protect itself as a sovereign state. I think the Jewish people should be able to have a sovereign state. And at the same time, I'm not a Zionist. I don't think it's part of the end times, nor do I think it has to be protected at all costs, no matter what they do. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there. Like, Israel has a right to be Israel. I don't know. Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. I think that also many Arabs would agree with that. At this point in time, where we live and where we exist and how things are going, there has to be an agreement that both of those two things can exist mutually, respectfully, and safely. I think many Palestinians would be okay with living under those circumstances and conditions, and I think many Jews would feel the same way. I think the two-state solution is a very valid approach, but it has to be a two-state solution. It can't be one overpowering the other.
Colonizing, grabbing land, making sure it's disproportionate, we have more than you, which is kind of the thing, right?
Absolutely.
And it's been that way for thousands of years.
For thousands of years, the back and forth. And even though both can claim having the right to that land, it is fair to say, due to history, religion, anything you want to throw in the mix, I think this is an area that should be negotiable. And it is like, historically there has been validity for both, and it's never going to be any different unless they reach a consensus that they will agree, okay, well, we'll figure it out once and for all.
But how do you get around the Holy Land aspect of this? God gave us this land, it is our birthright, seems to be the calling card for many of the actions. And I'm like, well, a lot of this is religiously motivated. We see Christians and Jews. I've seen a lot of evangelicals here in the United States, and they're like, it all belongs to God, right? And then you do have some people who they hate Israel, and they think Israel needs to be destroyed because they're the infidel. Is that accurate?
Oh, that's very accurate. That is a very powerful message. I heard it my whole life growing up, and absolutely.
Were you taught to hate Jews?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Oh, very much so. I mean, there is a visceral hate between the two, and yet they are essentially at the same time cousins and Semites and supposed to live and coexist together. The stories in the Islamic teachings have claimed to have Muslims and Jews live side by side, and yet, this continues and is perpetuated today. What I will say to that, though, is the fact that there is this part historically where in that area, and this is simplifying it very, very much so,
tracking.
But all religions have had some level of presence in that little spot of the earth. If we like to believe in these, stories, and some may be slightly historically accurate, others are maybe fairy tales, however we want to look at them. But there is this claim that every religion has had a settlement in that particular region. And so, great. Make it a place for all. It does not have to be like the Vatican only for Catholics or the Kaaba only for Muslims. If it's true that all religions have cycled through there, what a great way to create an ambassadorial piece of the world where everyone can finally come together.
But if you hate the other, if you dehumanize the other, who cares what happens to them? So
exactly.
How do you fix that? Do you go after the ideology and try to appeal to their humanity? I mean, how many thousands of years does this conflict have to go on? I guess what I'm asking, Jasmin, is how do we fix the world?
And that's what you and I are going to resolve today. Let's make that promise.
They would just put us in charge.
Right?
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, though, that the people who are in charge have only one interest. And that's why these things will never be solved, because they make us believe that that's what it's about. But it really is about more than that.
Forgive the interruption. I'm so sorry.
Please.
Do you feel like that? I know the answer. You know the answer. I just want to hear you articulate it because you're so good. People do what they want and they say it's God's idea. You got to figure Netanyahu is just doing what he wants to do. And he's like, well, it's not my thing. I was ordained by the Almighty, right?
Absolutely. Didn't George Bush say that at one point?
Yeah.
George W., that he had to pray for it to know what the answer was. That's a really amazing and convenient way out. And I think we are pre-programmed to accept that. And if we don't accept, and by the way, we're seeing this happen not only in religious spaces, but even in sort of social ideological spaces. It's extremely convenient to have a cop-out when you're not taking full responsibility, but you really have to put it in the hands of something greater than you. And so then everyone has to sort of succumb and accept that this is sort of the rationale of anything.
So tell me, just summarize your beef with how Westerners have been doing pro-Palestine protests. I don't know, what are you saying that causes you a moment of pause?
So when October 7th happened, it was horrible, it was awful, it was terrible under every point of view. What came after that, the aftermath of Israel's response, was, I'd like to say, initially equally horrible, and then just went the next level horrible. And I can see how that angered the global community. I mean, the entire world is not standing by Israel now, today, after standing by them when this all happened. Fantastic. We're all on the same page for the most part. I know a lot of people are not, but I'm just saying, from my perspective, many are standing on this page. When I look at how the West reacted to post-October 7th, my first initial wish was that those who really wanted to commit to finding their voice in this movement and expressing their voice, first and foremost is educating themselves on what that whole conflict is about. And I'm specifically talking to young people. It is amazing to see the excitements, the enthusiasm, the exuberance in youth when they want to call out unfairness and injustice. But at the same time, it is not only fruitless, it's actually damaging if you come to it without any knowledge or any background or any education. So first and foremost, educate yourself to really understand what the historic context of this conflict on October 7th is related to. It's related to something far longer than that. Okay, great. So if we start there, that's awesome. If we don't start there, and or if we do start there, but then we perpetuate a message that is completely unproductive, i.e., the protests. Now, I've been an activist. I consider myself an advocate now because I think activism is like a fire that burns really, really hot, really, really fast, and then when it's gone, poof, you got nothing left. But advocacy is the coals and the fire that stays warm underneath that then actually gets things done, i.e. keeping warmth, cooking, whatever. Those two have to go hand in hand. But the activists, unfortunately, right now, they behave in a way that they don't want anyone else to be involved in the conversation. They just want to burn and that's it. But then what do you have to show for it? For example, all the protest non-voters during the election. I'm not voting because of the Palestinian issue. Okay, you do realize that non-vote is actually a really damaging outcome and a completely dangerous potential circumstantial outcome.
It became a de facto vote, really.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we're living the consequences of that. Gee, thanks. Do we think that Kamala Harris would have done great on this issue? Probably not. But definitely on many other issues, better than what we're dealing with right now.
There is a lesser evil.
Exactly. So that's one of the examples. The other example is shutting down roads, going on college campuses, all of those things. It's like for a minute there, I'm like, yeah, I'm on board with like showing protest, show solidarity, take the signs, go down in the streets, do all that. But if you're doing it in a way that then harms other people, you have no leg to stand on. Because when you're blocking highways and people can't get to work, many of those people getting to work are probably immigrants, maybe some of them even Palestinian immigrants. You know, some of them are probably undocumented people that should not be, you know, dangerously in a location where they could be found and caught. And we can talk about that, you know, in a different vein. But all I'm saying is that you are putting a lot of people in danger who are potentially at risk. And you don't care because you have a message and you want to deliver that message. And again, you're perpetuating a chant that is completely empty because you're getting no results from that. It is performative. It lacks any interest or desire to actually understand the region, to understand the people, to understand the culture, to differentiate between culture and religion. There's so many pieces to this lovely salad, if you will, fruit salad, that, you know, they're just picking the fruits that they like and they don't want to deal with the other things that they don't care about.
You would agree, though, that there have been many times where we need to be disruptors.
Oh, 100%.
Disrupt the system.
100%.
Wrench in the works. Some would argue that raising the shitstorm at the college campuses and all that stuff would qualify as good trouble. No?
So yes and no. So the yes part is if you're going to protest and you're going to do that, that's awesome. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is when those protests then are harming the people who are there to get an education. For example, other students who are maybe not protesters and maybe it's not their calling, that's not what they do. Maybe they even agree with the protesters, but they just want to go to school, get to class, do what they need to do. They were harassed, they were stopped, they were attacked, they were accused for being, you know, genocidal because they're silent, they're not participating. That is not okay. That, to me, you lose your mission at this point.
I'm reminded of I'm trying to think of his name. It's been so many years, but it's along those same lines. Everybody was the hero in their own story. A college campus had a debate, and there was like a human rights advocate and a person who was considered very much not. And they were going to be on the debate stage and engage each other. And the students shouted them down and made it impossible for anybody to finish a sentence. And before you know it, there were concerns for the speaker's safety and they had to be escorted off the campus, blah, blah, blah. So In theory, I think what they were thinking was hate speech will not be allowed here. We are going to take a stand for love by shouting down the hate and not allowing this person to have a platform. And it's one of those things, if you see it on a bumper sticker, it sounds rather noble. I myself would like to have seen the exchange.
Absolutely.
Two adults exchanging even the best or worst of ideas in a forum where those can be assessed by everybody else. Everybody was there under agreed terms.
Yep.
And yet there were people acting really in destructive and counterproductive ways who felt like they were the heroes in that story.
And that is what I'm most worried about at the moment, what's happening on the left, is this. Well, I know people don't like hearing things like
you
cancel
damn
culture.
centrist, you've sold out your liberal values.
Absolutely. I am now considered a conservative or a leaning right and all of these accusations. And I keep saying, actually, liberals haven't moved. Liberals are exactly where they've always been, which is standing firm on the space of everyone has the right and is entitled to live and let live as long as you're not crossing, obviously, legal terms and harm. If you're not doing any one of those things, I don't care. You can all exist. I literally don't care. But what's happened on the left is they've moved so far that they have then, left us anchored liberals in a space where it's like, oh, wait, this is no longer on the left. This is truly somewhere in the middle, I guess, or maybe in space. I don't know. Because I truly don't think we are anywhere on the spectrum for real. But that left has leaned so hard in a direction that, to me, it's like a swing when it goes over the bar. You have literally now gone to the other side where we used to accuse the right of being the ones who censor, who silence. You can't say this, you can't say that. That's happening on the left, in my opinion now, even more than the right.
No, it happens. I mean, any tribe can be dogmatic. We've talked, I gave a speech, I guess, a couple of years ago where we talked about how a lot of times many of the overt things people say and do in an in-group are signaling to the in-group that they're still worthy of membership, right? I sure don't want to get kicked out. I don't want to be accused of blasphemy and then become othered, and then they're going to commit themselves to destroy me. So here, look how worthy I am.
And they probably don't even care or even believe that. But they say it because, God forbid, you get canceled or you get kicked out of your tribe.
Oh, you're giving cover to the right-wingers by saying that.
And
by making a nuanced position about liberals or the left.
But that's the problem. That is the absolute problem, is that right now we are so terrified. And in my opinion, the collapse has already happened from within. If the left does not wake up and actually find a way to unify with all their differences, because the left is a far greater umbrella than the right. The right is pretty one-minded. It's got one mission, for the most part, one mind, one trajectory, nationalism, whatever you want to call it. They're headed in that same direction altogether. Many conservatives, unfortunately, don't fall in that line and have found themselves somewhat politically homeless. But the left has always prided itself of being a large umbrella that welcomes so many different perspectives and ways of life. That is an amazing thing. But they're now playing the hierarchy game there, because some are more important than others. Some voices are more valued than others. And if you happen to have this voice, and this voice somehow contradicts my voice, then we're going to clash, and I'm going to get angry at you, and I'm going to cancel you.
Okay. People are wondering, what specifically are we referring to? I'll throw this out. We'll give some red meat for the conversation.
Sure.
Okay? So on the left, because we want to make sure that we are not being bigoted or discriminatory against people of color. A lot of people have decided Muslims are a race.
Exactly.
Islam is a race and not an idea, not a truth claim, not a religion. Muslims are, I guess, brown people. I don't know. I mean, that's the thinking, right?
Sure.
So if you criticize Islam, then you are guilty of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
If you insult the prophet, etc., if you think the hijab should not be on the cover of Cosmo, oh, you're so Islamophobic, then you get targeted by people who, even, again, for the noblest of reasons, who want to be there to support women who are being oppressed. Essentially, they're giving cover to Islam. I mean, I think they are. I don't know. What do you think?
100%.
Okay.
Absolutely. I am allergic to the term Islamophobia.
I don't think it's a bullshit term.
It's a bullshit term, and it is so harmful and damaging. And what you want to hear? What's even more aggravating than that? That me, as an ex-Muslim woman who lived under that oppressive ideology for 25 years, when I say this, the left, the Westerners, the non-Arabs, the non-Muslims have the nerve to tell me I'm Islamophobic when I'm calling out the problems on the Islamic fundamentalists.
So you get it from two sides.
Oh, yeah.
You've got over here, you have angered the prophet, you infidel.
Exactly.
And over here, they're like, you're
How
an
dare you.
Islamophobe, you infidel.
Absolutely. And that's what really, really gets me. It's like, first of all, you don't know the first thing about what you're even defending. I am not necessarily saying go and hate on Muslims. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying. I don't think you should hate on any human being, regardless of what their ideology, belief system, or religious affiliation is. That is, in my opinion, my true classic liberalism. Live and let live. If the religion serves you, fantastic. If the religion is going to infringe upon other people, that is a problem. That is what you can question. But Islam specifically, for some reason, and I'm not sure why the West has bought into this, it stands and completely is glorified above anything else and any other religion. It is the only ideology that is not criticized, religiously speaking. There's other ideologies we don't criticize, but religiously speaking, Islam is the only one that no one will touch, and there's a fear around it. So yeah, the propaganda of Islamic fundamentalism is powerful because they managed to scare the entire world from criticizing it, and the West, so to speak, the left in the West, have turned it into either a race, ethnic, or national origin ideology, as opposed to it is just a religion like Christianity, like Judaism, like any other religion that's worthy of criticism.
Sometimes I feel like if I just use the right words, the problem is the words require more than one sentence. No one should ever be told that they cannot wear the veil, right? The whole point is a woman should have the right to wear what she wants. At the same time, let's not celebrate the veil as long as it is being used as a weapon to dehumanize and oppress. Those two things can exist in the same space. I'm not going to tell a woman what to wear, but let's not put them on the cover of Cosmo and make it all glam and sexy and look how, progressive we are, because that then gives cover to the people who are dehumanizing people with the hijab.
When that action takes place, I know that they say, well, we are letting other people see themselves. Nothing is more powerful than representation. So Muslim women feel represented and they feel seen. Well, what about all the women who are victims of that ideology and that belief system? Has anyone thought about them? Has anyone thought about how this impacts the women who are under that repressive, oppressive ideology and way of life? You can't have it both ways.
Final segment, let's get into Islam. The definition of Islam is peace? ? We're going to talk to Jasmin Faulk about the definition of the word Islam, Muslim women who are risking their lives at this very moment, and we're going to chat about the Jesus of Islam next. Here is the final segment of my conversation with Italian, Arab, American, ex-Muslim author and activist, Jasmin Faulk. Let me ask you this question. Is there a difference in your mind between Muslim and Islamist?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. So Muslim is the person, as we know. Islam is the religion. An Islamist, in my opinion, and this is a fairly new term. This is not a term that is equated when you are talking exclusively about the faith. So normally Islam is the religion. A person who follows Islam is a Muslim. An Islamist is someone who upholds the religion and its ideological system somewhat in extremism. That's my interpretation. When I think of Islamist, that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing of someone that is putting the religion in a fundamentalist ideological process, first and foremost, as opposed to a Muslim, which, by the way, the word Muslim in Arabic comes from, so the word Islam, the religion, means surrender. A Muslim is someone who has surrendered. You have surrendered to God, that you're like devout and you've surrendered. But an Islamist is someone that is taking it to the next level.
Don't the clerics deny that? Don't they say that Islam is defined as something else? I don't know, they deny that it means surrender to Allah. It's supposed to be a term of empowerment.
Fair. So the word surrender exactly in Arabic is istislam. That means surrender, istislam. Islam is probably a combination, and again, if people want to correct me, that's fine. It's probably a combination of both surrender and peace. So salam is peace, istislam is surrender, and Islam I believe, is probably a combination of those two words.
We're still talking about surrender, which seems to be the calling card for most fundamentalist cultures. You are surrendering your identity for the identity of the group or the God. I mean, would that be accurate?
That is accurate, and that's why it surprised me that people are arguing that statement, because if that is your belief system, there's nothing more beautiful than the affirming that you have surrendered to God.
Isn't it true, though, that most Muslims just want to live? They're peace-loving. It's in the West, in my, like, I'm in Oklahoma, so if I go and I say, oh, we had a Muslim family move in next door, I kid you not, their first thought is probably going to be, wow, I hope they don't show up with a dynamite vest on, right? I mean, they think Muslim, 9/11. You know, they think Muslim, they're going to blow themselves up and get the virgins and all that. It's this extremely terrifyingly reductive look. But the vast majority of Muslims are like, I think, most Christians. They practice a cultural faith. They may pray 5 times a day, who knows? But they don't want to harm anybody. I'm not excusing the religion. I don't know, Jasmine, back me up here.
No,
Tell me what you think.
Completely agree with you. The majority of Muslims are kind people. Most of them are not extremists. The majority are not extremists. So let me break it down this way. So, and this is, again, where the confusion comes. So Islam is the religion, the faith. Within Islam, you have the Arabs, you have the Southeast Asians, which are the fastest growing Muslim populations in the world, which is why Islam is so widespread, because a lot of Southeast Asians are now Muslim. And then you have, Islam spread North Africa, which of course are also Arab countries. And then you have it spread sort of in Eastern Europe and now also beyond. So when you look at it that way, you can imagine that while they all share the religion, they all have their own natural, cultural, traditional, national practices. So their religion is interpreted or lived in a very different way from someone in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia, or, everyone is going to have an approach to their religion based on their cultural influences and their historic context. That is really important to differentiate, because for some, it is not only their way of life, it's also their language. So for Arabs, Islam is also their language. But for Southeast Asians, it's not their language. For Eastern Europeans, it's not their language. Now, they can learn Arabic. So the nuances of how you are affected or impacted by religion is also tied to your cultural and traditional practices. When I say all this, I say it to reference the fact that the extremist and fundamentalist ideologies of Islam are in pockets, in very small pockets in the world, that are not widespread in every Muslim community and maybe even every Muslim country, but in small pockets. They have taken so much power, they have monopolized the religion everywhere in the world, and they have absolutely fear-mongered anyone that has any association with Islam. So to conclude, I will say this. Muslims who are anywhere in the world are just people, like you said, wanting to live their lives, to live calmly, to live peacefully. When I say we have to critique fundamentalism and radicalism and extremism, I'm talking about the ideologies and the implementation and permission to implement those ideologies, whether it's in cultures, in governments, or in societies.
The women in Iran, the part of the Iran revolution, right? Women, life, freedom. They're putting their lives on the line for equality and autonomy, and they're largely Muslims, right?
Yeah, so they are. And many of them probably want to hold on to that Muslim identity from a cultural perspective. Many of them probably want nothing to do with the religion. Many of them probably want to hold on to some level of religion and spirituality and faith, but on their own terms and maybe in a more progressive, secular way. I know those things don't sound like they'd go together, secular and religion, but it can work, especially in Islam. I mean, it hasn't been practiced very frequently.
Tracking. Yeah, you're someone who probably uses the Muslim culture is more of an aesthetic.
Exactly.
It's the framework for human existence, but you don't necessarily hold to the dogma. Would that be a fair way to say it?
Totally. And maybe you're following some rituals. For example, the month of Ramadan, maybe you'll fast the month of Ramadan, because that is both a kind of a tradition for most Muslims. You'll fast the whole month. You'll do all the rituals during that time. But maybe all year you're not going to pray 5 times a day, for example. So you're still ritualistically doing some Islamic practices, but you're not necessarily doing every single expectation. So those Muslims do exist. They absolutely exist. And those women in Iran are absolutely risking their lives, and I stand by them. And they do want to just be members of the global society in a way that does not put them either in that oppressed and completely erased way, but also at the same time without being a threat to the rest of the world and being seen as, Islamic terrorists or part of the problem.
There's a way to advocate for them without advocating for those who oppress them. And that's when it gets messy. We talked about the aesthetic of the religion. It's like the Jewish faith. The vast majority, I think, of Jews are mostly secular. Many are non-believers outright, but they like the clothing, they like the music, they like the traditions and the customs and the food, and for them, it sort of colors the human existence. I'm down with that. Right?
Aha, but here's where the difference is, and this is where the Jews are lucky, because the Jews are it's both their religion and their ethnic identity. It's also who they are as a people. Islam is not an ethnic identity. Anyone can be Muslim, but you have to be Jewish to be a Jew.
Now, I can't decide I'm going to follow Judaism and be Jewish?
Based on my understanding, and I'm not going to speak on behalf of the Jewish faith. Here's my understanding, because I've asked some Jewish friends. If you are Jewish by ethnicity, you are Jewish. And usually it's you are born of a Jewish mother. If you're born of a Jewish father, you are technically not as Jewish as, and again, I will probably be corrected if I'm wrong. This is information I heard from actual Jewish friends who have explained it to me this way. You can convert and become Jewish, especially if you marry into, a Jewish family. You can make that choice. I believe Ivanka Trump did that. So I've heard. But I think there are rituals you have to practice, and you have to it's not as easy as any other religion.
You have to assimilate in a way.
You have to assimilate, and you have to be accepted, and you have to acknowledge that you are Jewish probably by faith now and not by identity and ethnicity. Muslims, on the other hand, all you have to do is say, Ashhadu anna la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and you're a Muslim. And that is, I declare that there's only one God, and that God is Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. All you need to say is that, and you are a Muslim. Then after that, of course, you have to do all the practice and the rituals, because if you don't, then now you are not only not doing the faith-based rituals, now you're a really bad Muslim because you've become a Muslim and you're not doing it.
Which brings me to the point of how much of that is just being a parrot. Most of the times I've heard an Islamic apologist, they seem to be just throwing recitations at me, not understanding. Do they teach in Islam just to vomit out the text without meaning?
So it depends where you're asking this question. In some areas, they teach Islam and they really want to understand it, and they turn it into an actual academic, scholarly process. Great. Countries like Egypt have done that, countries like Syria, and, I don't know if it's still the norm in the practice, but in history, we know that they have been scholars and have been really good at kind of understanding the historic context and the interpretive context. But in other areas where it's a lot more fundamental, Iran, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia until recently, or maybe until now, I'm not sure, they teach you verbatim the religion, and you just have to take it as is. Now, one thing that I tend to share is when I went to school, I went to a private school. I went to a school where the royal family went to the school with me, so it was a private school. We had, again, girls and boys segregated, but out of all the subjects that we learned, which included math and biology and physics and literature, Arabic literature and grammar and all that, there were 9 subjects that were all tied to Islam. 9 subjects that were only exclusively tied to Islam. Quran, the reading of the Quran, the memorization of the Quran, the learning of the pronunciation of the Quran, the interpretation of the Quran, then you have the hadith, which are the Prophet's sayings, then you have fiqh, which is basically the rituals, then you have faith, and then you have, what am I forgetting? A couple more.
Oh, you got 7. That's impressive.
Right. And so those are the subjects that we're taught in school. So there's not a lot of room to say, I didn't get enough information. Can I know more about this, or can I ask a question here? Because they are feeding you all that information. And according to the style of teaching, we are giving you everything you need to know. There's no questions to be asked. The answers are all there. If you happen to ask a question, like my question in school was, teacher, excuse me, if you're saying that music is haram, it's a sin, which is what fundamentalist Muslims believe, then why would God, who creates everything perfectly, create Beethoven? Why did he create Beethoven with the genius that he had musically? Why would he create him like that to make him suffer? And my teacher's answer was, those are the things we don't ask because only God knows those answers. And the phrase in Arabic is ilm al-ghayb, which means it's in the knowing is in the unknown. In other words, only God knows.
The mystery is part of the journey, and it's a trust exercise.
Totally.
In Allah.
Surrender.
Or, Christians do that with God, right?
Yep.
His ways are not my ways. Who knows the mind of God?
Exactly. And one thing I always like to share is the fact that there are not many differences between Islam and Christianity in terms of the stories that are told and the history of the different prophets and the tribes, all of those are the same stories in the Quran. The most fundamental difference between the two religions is the fact that Muslims believe that there's only one God and Christians believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
Isn't Jesus part of Islam?
He is. He's a very revered and beloved prophet, not the Son of God.
Not a God.
Absolutely not. And his mother, the Virgin Mary, is the most revered woman in Islam and probably the only woman that's mentioned in the Quran.
You don't think of Mary in Islam.
Maryam.
That's a whole other conversation, Jasmin.
There's a whole surah in the Quran titled Maryam. It's the only, place where a woman is acknowledged.
Makes you wonder if Mary showed up and walked the streets of Saudi Arabia, if they would force her to wear the veil. Mary, cover up, Mary, damn it.
Exactly.
And you're going to need someone else to join you in court, by the way. Fine, let's end up with a message to, I don't know how to say it other than the West, but, we're recording this in Canada. I'm from the United States. We're not great at speaking about issues regarding to Islamism, Islamist extremism, Muslims, the Muslim faith, because it's really in many ways not our wheelhouse. We don't see it on every corner. And tragically, we're not really all that, we're not as interested as we should be, considering the influence Islam and Islamists have in the world. What's your message to anybody within earshot who lives on this side of the planet?
So the first thing I'll say to that is Islam is not a monolithic system at all. So this idea that we have to approach Islam as a thing is wrong to begin with and really needs to change. Islam is a very complex religion with so many sects, with so many lineages, with so many ideologies and so many belief systems. Not only between the Sunnis and the Shiites, but even within the Sunnis, you have the Hanbali, the Maliki, and it just goes on and on. The Shiites have the same, and it continues to evolve as time goes. So that's the first thing. Stop thinking of Islam as a monolithic religion, number one. Number two, if you are interested in knowing more about the religion, great. Read it from a scholarly standpoint, but also read the Quran and the interpretation of the Quran.
Oh God, don't make me read the Quran. I've started the Quran and it was numbing. What am I, or is it just me?
So there's parts of it that I can see as numbing, there's parts of it that are really disturbing, and there's parts of it that are, okay, this makes sense, this is very sweet and lovely. So just like the Bible, it has stories of horror, it has messages of absolute insanity, and then it has moments where you're like, this is great.
Some poetry kind of thing.
Yeah, this is great. This is a lovely story or a fairy tale, or this is a beautiful message. So it has a little bit of everything. So if not from the entertainment standpoint, maybe from the trying to understand
Suck
it, right?
up, Seth. Do your due diligence and know what's in the Quran. Okay.
And you don't have to, but to answer your question, I think it's really important for people who want to show solidarity, who want to stand by especially diversity. I know that's a word many are allergic to right now, but if you really want to not be a xenophobe and you want to be kind to other people, accept them from who they are as human beings and treat people as they are. I'll answer your question by kind of giving you the example of a question I get asked often. How do I then answer when people are bringing up Islam and I don't feel like as a Westerner I can say, but Islam is bad because of all these things? No, that's not what we need to do. What you need to do is address the human rights violations, and not just in Islam, in any part of the world. So if you're going to say, listen, I understand you are talking about religion, but I really have a question around women and the treatment of women, the oppression of women. Talk about the human experience, and then that'll translate into maybe this ideology needs to be addressed or changed or maybe questioned. If you're not comfortable to go straight to the source and question the source, start with the violations of the source, and then eventually you'll get to the source.
Our shared humanity.
That's right.
Jasmin, you're amazing. Thanks for talking to me.
It's an honor to be on your show, Seth. Thank you.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.